In the West, General Rosecrans, the new commander of the Army of the Cumberland, was settled in Nashville. Despite repeated urging by the War Department, Rosecrans had refused to move against Confederate General Bragg. He took his time reorganizing, resupplying, and training his men in Nashville. Finally, the day after Christmas, 1862, Rosecrans marched from the city in 3 columns, seeking the enemy. Bragg, meanwhile, was in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He was struggling against subordinate generals who had sent a request to Jefferson Davis to have Bragg removed and replaced by General Joseph E. Johnston. Davis determined not to remove Bragg, but neither did he remove the fractious generals under him. Rosecrans marched his over 80,000 men toward Murfreesboro, harassed along the way by Confederate Brigadier General Joseph Wheeler's cavalry. Rosecrans was forced to leave about half his force along the way to guard his rear and supply lines from Wheeler's attacks. On December 30th, Rosecrans found Bragg's army in a strong position astride Stones River, blocking the way to Chattanooga. Rosecrans and Bragg developed identical battle plans, each planning to envelop the enemy's right flank. The Confederates seized the initiative, striking at dawn on December 31st. A Confederate corps, supported by cavalry, struck the Union right. They quickly pushed the defending Union troops back. Meanwhile, Wheeler's cavalry was wreaking havoc. Transports of wounded soldiers back to Nashville required heavy escorts, pulling men from the Union line. The Union's right flank was bent back, though by afternoon, the Confederate assault had bogged down. The following day, New Year's, both sides sat warily facing each other. Bragg believed that Rosecrans was planning a retreat, which indeed many of Rosecrans' officers were advising. But the Union forces were digging in. When Bragg attacked the Union left wing on January 2nd, massed Union artillery stopped them cold, and Union counterattacks pushed the Confederate right flank back. Rosecrans received resupplies and reinforcements on January 3rd. Bragg could see now that the Army of the Cumberland wasn't going to retreat and would instead continue to receive fresh troops. Bragg had only 20,000 effectives at this point, and Rosecrans could soon have more than 3 times as many. Bragg withdrew to the south, and Rosecrans occupied Murfreesboro. Though the battle had achieved little tactically, it was a powerful morale boost for the Union. Lincoln wrote to Rosecrans, "You gave us a hard-earned victory, which had there been a defeat instead, the nation could scarcely have lived over." The Confederate threat to Kentucky and Middle Tennessee had been halted. Rosecrans dug massive earthworks at Murfreesboro, which served as a Union supply depot until the end of the war. Back in the East, Burnside made another disastrous attempt on Fredericksburg. This time, his plan was to take advantage of the unusually dry weather to move his troops a few miles up the Rappahannock, where they could cross at fords. They set out on January 19th and continued their progress over dry, frozen ground on the 20th. Finally, his army completely mired, Burnside called a halt to the Mud March. Not surprisingly, perhaps, Burnside's subordinate generals were unhappy with their commander. As had happened with the Confederate commander Bragg, Burnside's subordinates took their complaints to the president. Furious, Burnside demanded that either he or his subordinates be removed. Unlike Jefferson Davis, Lincoln removed the commander. Burnside was transferred to command the Department of the Ohio. Major General Joseph Hooker was given command of the Army of the Potomac. Nicknamed Fighting Joe by journalists, he had a reputation for bold action as a division and corps commander. John Meade Gould described the change.
Hooker put life into everything, a very much needed life as it was too, and his most important act in a soldier's estimation was the providing of good rations. From our first arrival at Stafford Courthouse, we began to improve in every way. We had drills and dress parades as often as the weather would permit. Inspections by general and staff officers were made more frequently than ever before. When they saw anything worth complimenting, they did it in writing. Much praise was due McClellan for his success with raw troops after Bull Run. But Hooker taught old soldiers and made 100 improvements upon an army which had come to believe it knew everything.
Hooker abolished Burnside's grand divisions, returning the Army to its former organization of 7 corps, each with about 15,000 men. Hooker also introduced corps badges. These provided a sense of identity to the men and greatly improved the esprit de corps. Each division within a corps had a variation of that corps' badge in a different color. The badges were worn over their left breast or on the left side of their caps. The 6th Corps would soon distinguish itself under Major General John Sedgwick when they would finally capture the Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg. The 9th Corps was formed by General Burnside, and it followed him when he was transferred to the Western Theater. Hooker also greatly improved the Army's cavalry. Although the Confederacy had been making excellent use of cavalry under leaders such as Jeb Stuart, Joseph Wheeler, and Nathan Bedford Forrest, the Union's cavalry units were usually simply attached to the infantry corps and given little role in campaigns. Hooker created a unified cavalry command under General George Stoneman. As an indication of how this change improved the Union cavalry, Leonard Jordan, a private with the 10th Maine Battalion, later wrote,
"The cavalry of the Army of the Potomac had lately shown much pluck, and hereafter we were no more to hear the taunt, 'Who ever saw a dead cavalryman?' Nor was a squad of cavalry galloping to the rear past infantry on the march to be assailed by the cry, 'Look out for fun ahead, boys! Cavalry to the rear.'"
Hooker had, as John Meade Gould said, improved the Army in 100 ways. Better officer training, better inspections, better food, better ambulance corps, better cavalry, and more. His men were rested and his army was large. With almost 134,000 men, his army dwarfed whatever forces the Confederacy could put in front of him. Lee's 60,000 troops occupied the heights south of the Rappahannock below Fredericksburg. They had fortified a 15-mile line. To move past Lee's fortifications would require strategy as well as force. At the end of April, Hooker made his move. 3 infantry corps, numbering about 70,000 men, moved secretly northwest, up the Rappahannock, where they could ford the streams to Lee's north. 2 other corps, with 40,000 men, were to feign an attack on Fredericksburg, striking across at the same spot where the Union had met defeat in December. These corps were intended to tie down Lee's forces in Fredericksburg. At the same time, 10,000 cavalry were sent to raid behind Lee's rear, cutting his supply lines to Richmond and diverting his attention. The campaign began well for Hooker. By April 30th, Hooker had led his 70,000 infantry across the Rappahannock and Rapidan rivers. They advanced to Chancellorsville, a major crossroads 9 miles west of Fredericksburg. They were now in a low, flat, wooded area, locally known as the Wilderness. Narrow roads and thick woods limited movement and visibility. Meanwhile, another 40,000 Union infantry demonstrated against Fredericksburg, holding Confederate attention there. For once, the Union Army seemed to have outmaneuvered Lee. The question that remained was, what would they do now? Having sent most of his cavalry on that failed mission to harass Lee's rear, Hooker now had no cavalry to warn him of General Lee's movements. And Lee was moving. While 1 brigade of cavalry kept Stoneman's cavalry under surveillance, the rest of the Confederate horsemen, under Jeb Stuart, had been shadowing Hooker and sending information back to Lee. Lee knew exactly where the bulk of Hooker's forces were and their strength.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.